In this episode, we talk about a new clinic that is helping people and their families make informed choices about end-of-life care. We also talk about Rahul Gandhi once again accusing the Election Commission of voter fraud and other irregularities. But we begin today by talking about the Supreme Court's decision to give Reliance Foundation's Vantara project a clean chit. Hi, I'm Icha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. It was only last month, on the 25th of August, that the Supreme Court had set up a special investigation team to look into the wide-ranging allegations of animal smuggling, mistreatment, and financial irregularities at Reliance Foundation's Wildlife Rescue and Rehabilitation Centre, Vantara. Sprawled within the green belt of Reliance's Jamnagar refinery complex in Gujarat, the centre is home to over 2,000 animals across 43 species, including more than 200 rescued elephants. Now, just 3 weeks after setting up the SIT on Monday, the court actually gave the project a clean chit and closed all complaints against it, saying that the SIT's exhaustive investigation had found no contravention in law.
So, of course, the Zoological Rescue and Rehabilitation Center that's in Jamnagar, Vantara, has been under the spotlight because of the huge promotion it has had from across the board, right?
This is the Indian Express's national legal editor, Apurva Vishwanath.
You had Prime Minister Modi visit the place. You had this big inauguration of Vantara and the showcase of it when Anant Ambani, who runs the place, was getting married. So it's been under the spotlight for a while. And there were a lot of these questions about the regulatory mechanism into how they acquire endangered species or wild animals. And these are acquisition of animals that are happening from India and abroad, particularly in India of elephants. What is the paperwork really to get these animals? So there were a lot of these questions, and that's perhaps how one of the PILs was filed in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court had to look at this issue.
Now, what's interesting to note is that according to the SIT, the facilities for animal welfare and care were found to be of the highest international standards, not merely adhering to, but in several aspects exceeding the Central Zoo Authority benchmarks in zoological management and conservation. So to talk more about what the SIT uncovered, how the court framed its ruling, and why this verdict matters, we speak to Apurva in this segment. Apurva, you spoke briefly about the project earlier and the accusations that were made against it. So can you tell us how this case played out in the court?
So what happened in the Supreme Court is public interest litigation that was filed, which said that, prima facie, many of these acquisition of animals may not be lawful, or it needs to be investigated how they've been done. And that's why the court needs to look at this. But what is kind of curious about how things went about in the Supreme Court is also the breakneck speed at which things kind of happened. In the first hearing, the court did say that there is no material to substantiate these allegations. The court said that these are just media reports and there's nothing here and, in the allegations. But in the next hearing, the Supreme Court constituted an SIT. And this special investigative team was headed by a former Supreme Court judge himself, Justice Chalameshwar. And the report was filed again on time. In just a matter of few weeks, we had gone from the Supreme Court entertaining this issue at all to the SIT kind of giving a clean chit. And then what is striking is the Supreme Court's directions following that report, following the clean chit. And this is a 2-judge bench, and the court says that it has no hesitation in accepting the conclusion drawn in the report, and no contravention of law has been reported by the SIT, and the complaints listed are closed. And the judges also read out parts of what is in the report and said, all the acquisition of animals have been carried out in regulatory compliance. There is no issue anywhere. So that is whether there was any merit to the allegation or not is a whole different issue. But, the Supreme Court, as we know, is the highest court of the land. And when the Supreme Court says something, that is final and conclusive. So now that the Supreme Court has said that there is nothing here, it kind of forecloses or it closes all the doors for any future investigation into any of this or inquiry into any issue like that. So the Supreme Court lending its weight to this issue, that is, we'll have to see how that plays out in future.
Right, and speaking about this high-powered SIT, we know that they were looking into multiple aspects, like how endangered species were acquired, what are the conditions they are living in, and also the location of the center itself, which is near an industrial area. So, do we know how did the SIT conduct the investigation, and also what were its exact findings?
Yeah, so, the interesting thing is that the court order records that, Vantara made available all the paperwork for the committee and, it did everything that it could. But we don't know for sure really what transpired in these meetings because the report of the committee is actually in a sealed envelope. Only parts of it, that is some operative portion, is what was kind of disclosed by the judges. And the judges say that based on the report, then we are going to give our findings. So a detailed, what is the material that the committee looked into. And, at the end of the day, this is a committee headed by a retired judge. It's not the actual regulatory mechanism that way, if you see. So what really transpired within the committee, we don't know. But the court says that the report and annexures in a pen drive be resealed and kept confidential. And it can only be provided to the respondent, which is Vantara. That raises a lot of questions in terms of how the institution looks at these issues, especially because the question was of accountability. And when you kind of shroud that in secrecy, it raises more questions than it answers. And in terms of the order, what the Supreme Court has said following that SIT is that, any complaints, petitions, which could be newspaper articles, catalogs, anything will just stand closed. And then it goes on to say that no further complaint or proceedings based on these allegations shall be entertained before any judicial, statutory or administrative forum. And this kind of secures that finality. So all of these issues is where, the Supreme Court really pushes the envelope and that raises more questions than it answers.
And Apurva, speaking about the barring of any future complaints, is that a standard practice?
Yeah, so it is usually settled principle that on the same set of allegations, there can't be multiple proceedings, right? So if the Supreme Court has looked at it, whatever the complaints that are mentioned, raised in the PIL, those will have to be duly answered. But again, we don't know if the committee, the SIT has gone into each of those allegations or if even the allegations were well fleshed out. We are talking about a PIL petitioner here. And this gentleman, Jaya Sukin, the petitioner, he is known to file a lot of PILs routinely. So what are his bona fides? What are the veracity of those complaints? That is something that is unknown. And then based on that, the court saying that no further complaint can be made, that kind of has a chilling effect because tomorrow if anyone else wants to bring about a similar complaint, that precludes them from doing it. And why this is an issue is because the court goes one step further and says it's not just that no future complaints will be entertained, but it also says that Vantara is free to pursue its remedies and, ask for deletion of any offending publication. So this kind of an order, which is essentially giving permission to seek gag orders, right? At a time when the court has not even examined what these offending publications are. That is a chilling effect on free speech because, these kind of orders can only be given once the court examines them and decides that they are defamatory or they are misinformation, and then they should be dealt with in any capacity, right? But the court saying that Vantara can go ahead and do it, it's sort of presuming that all of this, any reporting on Vantara is offending to the institution. So that is particularly problematic.
And lastly, of course, what's interesting is that this case moved surprisingly fast from PILs to the SIT report to the court's verdict, all within weeks.
Yeah. So, what is interesting here is that the observations of the court as well, once a report has come in, the court says that, now that an independent body has found no foul play, let's not make any unnecessary allegations. And this comment that Justice Pankaj Mittal made in court said that there are certain things which are probably the pride of this country and they shouldn't be unnecessary hue and cry for the sake of it. So these kind of observations from the court, again, it's part of the chilling effect that I was mentioning earlier. They preclude others from raising genuine questions, not just about Vantara, about any other private institution like this, right? It forecloses any credible reporting and has a really big impact on how free speech is exercised. And, the speed that you mentioned for the court itself, yes, a lot of PILs are cases where the court really monitors these issues and they take significant amount of time. The fact that the commissioning of the SIT's report and the Supreme Court's order, all of them come in just, say, a month. It did happen at a breakneck speed.
And next, we turn our attention to a subject that most of us avoid thinking about until we are forced to. For anyone who has cared for someone who is terminally ill, they would know that the final days are often the hardest, a time when people are perhaps suffering the most while having the least agency over their lives. Caregivers, too emotionally exhausted and traumatized, dread having to make decisions, whether it is to prolong life or hope for relief. Now, it is to give people agency over how they wish to spend their last days that hospitals have now started living will clinics. Here, people can talk openly about death with their family members before reaching a critical stage and sign a legal document outlining the kind of care they would like to receive. One such clinic recently opened at Delhi's Indraprasth Apollo Hospital, headed by Dr. Shushma Bhatnagar. In this segment, my colleague Shashank Bhargav speaks to the Indian Express's Anonna Dutt, who reported on it for the paper.
Anonna, one of the hardest things to talk about, and many of our listeners would agree, is how one wishes to die. In fact, thinking about how one wants to spend the very last days of their lives is a very difficult thing, and especially to do that with your loved ones, right?
It is very difficult, and it's not a conversation we usually have in our homes. So most people are very ill prepared for, in case they have a terminal illness, then, what needs to be done. Usually the children are not prepared, or anybody in their home, because the last wishes are not known. Like, what would they like to happen in case they are not in a condition to make those decisions?
And that makes sense because, we go through life avoiding any conversations around death. No one really wants to think about their own mortality or the mortality of their loved ones. And this is true for most people in general, but are doctors prepared to have that conversation?
No, they are not, because they are not taught to think about end of life. Most doctors know how to keep you alive, and they will try to keep you alive by all the means that they have. But that might not be something you would wish for or your family would wish for. And of course, now it is slowly changing. People are realizing that there is no use in doing certain treatments when you know that, the person will not be cured or will not be able to go back home. Then there's no point in doing certain treatments. So this awareness is coming slowly, but yes, you're right. Doctors are also not prepared to have this death conversation usually.
And in scenarios related to terminal illnesses and cancer especially, there is a big downside when your doctor does not know how to have that conversation. We've all heard of cases where sometimes people go through multiple rounds of chemotherapy because the family, of course, wants the person to continue living. But doctors, perhaps because they're uncomfortable to have that conversation, continue to recommend a treatment that takes an immense toll on one's body.
So if you ask most patients who have a terminal disease, they would want to be comfortable. I mean, of course, it would depend on from person to person, but most people would wish to be comfortable in their homes with their loved ones. They would not want to be constantly in hospitals. And, if you are talking about chemotherapy, that itself takes a lot of toll on the health. So you are having these reactions like you're puking and you're feeling weak, there's no energy. All of that happens when you're doing your chemo. And if at the end of that, there is no hope of survival, a lot of patients would not want to go through that.
Right, and presenting other options to patients beyond just the obvious ones and talking about the quality of life rather than just prolonging life, that is a tough conversation. And it is perhaps to facilitate these conversations that Dr. Sushma Bhatnagar has started this Living Will clinic in Delhi. And she's someone who deals in palliative and end-of-life care.
Right. So her journey actually started as a anesthesiologist in the cancer department at AIIMS. And she then went on to do a course abroad on palliative care. Once she came back, she realized that we do not have that sort of system in place. And when I talk about palliative care, that doesn't necessarily have to be end of life care, but also, cancer patients who are going through the treatment, how to make them more comfortable. So the department that's there, she used to be at AIIMS and she's now moved to Apollo. So the department that she started in AIIMS also helps patients. So for example, if a patient is traveling from, say, Bihar to AIIMS for their treatment, cancer treatment, they would teach the family on how to take care of the pots that are created, of how to help with the nasal feeding, how to take care of, say, bed sores and things like that. So just all around making a patient comfortable while they are going through the treatment, and also in case they are terminal, at what point you should stop the treatment and then just go into pain management. So that could be chemotherapy or, just morphine for the pain. So all of that, they walk the family through the entire treatment plan. That's what they have been doing. And in doing so, they realize that, if you have the right to live with dignity, you should also have the right to die with dignity.
And so talk about how does this clinic work? How does it equip both patients and their families to deal with these kind of situations and manage the last days of one's life?
So ideally, you would be going to this clinic before it's the last days of your life. The whole point of the clinic is to help patients and their family members discuss death. And that in itself is a very difficult topic. So first you have to talk about death. Then the clinic also helps them understand terminologies like cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. They would also talk about whether, you should be going through chemotherapy, radiation, do you need IV, do you need nutrition, all of these things. They would explain, they would tell you what happens if you withdraw this, what happens if you keep going. They would give you a realistic picture about whatever condition you have. And then you can make your choice whether you would want to be put on ventilator, whether you would want to receive the IV that the doctors give you, whether you would want to have, the doctors revive you if you know that you're terminal. So all of this conversation, and once you've made a decision, once you've discussed this with your family members, there's also a template that the clinic offers where it's a 8-page document in which people can actually choose what kind of treatment they would need in the end of the life. They can also choose the hospital that they would like to be treated, whether they would want to be in a hospital, hospice, or at home. They can make that choice. They can also choose a proxy who would be eligible to take all medical decisions on their behalf when they're not, in a condition to make those decisions.
Yeah, and the other thing you write about is that they've made this space open and welcoming to all kinds of people.
Right. So there's also some pointers which say that, okay, this is the gender I would like to be referred to during my treatment. So the staff would then have to go with that. They can also designate a person saying that this person is my partner and you have to refer to them as such. And these were included in the format to make it more inclusive for LGBTQ people and couples. And, you have all of these choices that you can make. It gets notarized and it's a legal document. So it's legally binding. So a lot of times what happens, people would put you on ventilator or would not take you off ventilator because there is no legal guidance on what you would want or what your family will want. Sometimes there is a disagreement within the family. So all of this gets solved when you have this legal document in place.
And this legal document, even though it will be made in Delhi, in Apollo, this would obviously be valid no matter where you go, right?
Yes, you can just go with that and the doctors would have to follow your wish.
And I don't want to conflate the two terms, but how closely is this related to euthanasia, for example?
So the current legal definition, there's actually, it makes a distinction between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. So active euthanasia would be something like a physician-assisted suicide where they actually give you an ingredient that would hasten death. And passive euthanasia is where you could withdraw certain care that you wouldn't want. And yes, to a certain degree, this is what it is, where you know that, if going on a ventilator would not, cure you or help you get better in some time, there's no point going on that, because then you're just stuck in the hospital and you can't go home, you can't be with your family. ICUs, your family can meet you for 1 hour a day. So that's the kind of care you can refuse and you can go home. And yes, so this sort of helps you with, say, passive euthanasia in that way.
And also, who all can go to this clinic?
Absolutely anybody. Even if you're not terminal, you can just go there, you can have this discussion with your family, and you can put that down in your living will so that in case something happens. And the thing with this is, if you meet with an accident, for example, it also has, one of the pointers actually asks whether you would like to be an organ donor. So, of course, cancers and things, these are things that you get a diagnosis and then you have some time to discuss the end of life care with your family. But if you meet with an accident, that's not the case. So you can just go anytime and have this in place, even if you do not have a terminal disease, or even if you're not very old, anybody can go.
And also, how long has this clinic been there for, and what have been some of the reactions to it?
So the clinic hasn't been there for long, I think a week at most. But I mean, not with the document, but Dr. Sushma has been helping the patients with, like I mentioned, end of life care, where, they have this discussion with the family, give them realistic what can happen, what can't happen. All of those things she has been doing. And in fact, for the story, I spoke to a few patients of hers whose father or wife had passed away. And they were talking about this whole guilt that comes with making a decision like that on their behalf. But because of the guidance that they received, they were able to do that. And one of the persons whose wife, just 32 years old, passed away with stomach cancer, he in fact said that he was very happy because his wife could be home, spend the entire day with the children watching television. And when she passed away with a smile. So what the patient said was, it would have been so much better had they had the discussion before. If there was a paperwork laying down clear terms on, what should be done in these cases, that would have been of great help.
And in the end, we talk about the continuing political tensions over voter roll accuracy. Yesterday, leader of opposition Rahul Gandhi accused the Election Commission of protecting those undermining Indian democracy. At a press conference, he pointed to alleged irregularities in Karnataka's Aland constituency, claiming that at least 6,000 votes were deleted during the 2023 elections.
Aland is constituency in Karnataka. 6,018 votes. Somebody tried to delete 6,018 votes. We don't know the total number of votes that were deleted in Aland in the 23 election. They're much higher than 6,018. But somebody got caught deleting 6,018 votes. And it was caught, like most crimes, by a coincidence.
According to Gandhi, the deletions were uncovered when a booth-level officer, or BLO, noticed that her uncle's name was missing from the electoral roll. On checking, she found that her neighbor's name had been misused to authorize deletion, even though neither she nor the neighbor had ever applied for it. Now, Gandhi further alleged that deletion requests targeting Congress supporters were generated using software from outside Karnataka.
So someone ran an automated program that ensured the first voter of the booth was the applicant. That same person got cell phones from outside the state, used them to file the applications. And we are pretty certain that this was done in a centralized manner and it was done at scale. This was not done in a, at a worker level. This was done at a call center level.
Meanwhile, the Election Commission rejected these allegations as incorrect and baseless. In its response, the EC confirmed that irregularities had indeed been detected in Aland in 2023, but emphasized that the Commission itself had filed an FIR to investigate the matter. It also clarified that no voter deletions can be carried out online by the public, as Gandhi had suggested. According to Election Commission rules, applications to delete names from electoral rolls can be made through Form 7 by any elector in a constituency or by a BLO. Deletion can be sought on grounds such as death or relocation of the voter. BLOs, typically local officials like teachers or Anganwadi workers, are tasked with field verification. The process requires issuing notices and providing an opportunity for the affected individual to respond before any deletion is finalized. For those who may not know already, the Aland controversy first surfaced in 2023 when a voter complained that his family's names were marked for deletion despite still residing in the same constituency. The Congress party at the time had said it would file complaints about Aland and other constituencies, while the EC highlighted that it had initiated the police case itself. In its guidelines, the EC has stated that the integrity of the electoral roll is maintained through multiple layers of verification, with BLOs and field-level verifying officers playing key roles. Deletion, it says, cannot be finalized without hearings and ensuring due process. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank Bhargav and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. You can also recommend it to someone you think may like it, with a friend or in your family. This is the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast or write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.